A shift in perspective in grammar is an awkward use of verbs or pronouns. It's an inconsistent use of those. And in this video, we'll talk about verb shifts. There are three kinds of verb shifts to watch out for, and the first one is a shift in tense. So we can split tenses into three kinds. We have the present tense, the now moment, then we have the past tense, what happened before, and the future tense, what will happen in the future. In the first example here, we read, I saw a fantail, beautiful little bird, in the bush behind the house. It has the most remarkable feathers. We start here with the past tense, I saw, and then in the second sentence we switch to the present tense. This is a grammatical mistake, and we probably should say it had the most remarkable feathers, but it's an understandable mistake, and that's because the second statement here is really talking about a kind of continuing fact, right? The fantail is something you just saw, but even when you walk away, it will continue to have the most remarkable feathers, unless it suddenly dies the moment you leave. So as a result, it's understandable that we might use the present tense, but it would be better grammatically if we used the past tense here and make it consistent. But you don't always have to be pedantic about your use of tenses. It's often perfectly acceptable to shift in tense. And that's something to remark upon, because you might learn about shifts in perspective and think that they're always wrong, but in fact we shift in perspective all the time with perfectly good reason. So in the second example here, we read, Pankhurst's contributions to women's suffrage are universally lauded and are lauded. This is in the present tense. And then we switch to the past tense with, despite the fact that she encouraged, so encouraged is in the past tense, violence to police officers. Now, this shift is perfectly fine because, of course, her contributions are lauded in the present tense at the present moment, but she encouraged, and we're talking about the early 20th century here, so we're stepping back in time, she encouraged violence and so on in the past. And the point then is that a shift in tense is very, very common. You just don't want to have an awkward shift in tense when it's not necessary. The second kind of shift to watch out for is a shift in mood. And there are three kinds of mood in English. There is the indicative, and the indicative is used for simple statements and descriptive statements, and also questions. And in fact, the indicative is the most common mood in English. Then we have the imperative, and the imperative is when you order people around. If you shout at somebody, stop, right? And the last one is the subjunctive, and that's a hard one. It's fairly rare in some ways, but it's often formed with modal auxiliaries. So you might say, I could do that, or I would do that, or I might, right? These are kind of forms of the subjunctive, and they're all hypothetical statements. Something might happen, but it did not necessarily happen. If you look at the first sentence then, we start with the imperative, finish sorting the receipts, and you might wipe. And this one is subjunctive then, the second verb. The reason for this might be that you're shouting at somebody and then you realize that maybe you should be a little bit nicer. And in the middle of your sentence, you shift to the subjunctive mood. But in an academic essay, in a formal context, you want to be more consistent. So you might write, finish sorting the receipts and also wipe the counters, not might wipe. Or if you want to be really nice, you might say, you might finish sorting the receipts and wiping the counters. So try to be consistent in your use of mood. The second one reads, I could have won if I was in the right age group. And here we start with the subjunctive again, I could have won. And then we switch to the indicative, if I was. But notice that we still have this kind of hypothetical if, and that's why technically this should be were. Watch out then for this was-were distinction, because it's a mistake people often make, and were is subjunctive and was is indicative. Our last kind of shift is a shift in voice. And in English there are two kinds of voice. There's the active voice, which refers to when the subject of a sentence is actively doing the action of the verb. And then the passive voice refers to when the action of the verb happens to the subject. So the first one then reads, Sarah argues. That's very much an active kind of verb, right? Sarah is doing the action. So Sarah argues that constantly shopping for clothing is unethical. Is another active voiced verb here. As sweatshops are encouraged and sustained by such behavior. So are encouraged, this is a passive voiced verb. And you can see that usually we use a kind of linking or helping verb here rather, and then we use a past participle to go with it. If we want to make this both active, we would say, and such behavior encourages and sustains sweatshops. And then they would both be active. So that would be a little bit more elegant. I would say that this kind of shift in voice is not always problematic. It may simply be awkward, not completely wrong, but it is one to watch out for if you want to be a little bit more consistent in your use of voice. But sometimes, and I really like to point out these cases where the shift is fine, sometimes it's acceptable to switch from the passive to the active or vice versa. So here we write Fiona is learning Latin, is active. She is taught by a retired high school teacher, and is taught is passive. The reason why we kept it the same is because we want the subjects to be the same here. So Fiona and she, these subjects refer to the same person, and if we made the high school teacher here the subject in the second instance, so the high school teacher taught her, then you can see that would be, or teaches her, that would be a little bit awkward. And the point then, just to sum up, is that a shift in perspective can be wrong, but there may be good reason for it. And if you're conscious and aware of what you're doing, then you may be able to determine whether that shift in perspective is right or not. That's it for shifts in perspective.